Okay, thank you very much. Welcome everyone to probably the greatest session at New York Climate Week. Appreciate you being here. You are also the best looking audience I've seen so far today, also the only audience I've seen so far today. And I am absolutely delighted to welcome you to Harnessing AI. We had to add AI into the title to get so many people in the audience, and Satellite Monitoring for Nature Positive Future. So my name is Craig Mills. I'm the director of the Land and Carbon Lab. The Land and Carbon Lab is an organisation which is convened by the World Resources Institute and the Bezos Earth Fund, and we have a teeny tiny mission which is to create universal access to land and nature-based carbon monitoring. So it's basically monitoring everything, everywhere, for everyone. You will see today some pretty exceptional speakers talking about land monitoring. Before we do that, I thought I'd give you 2 minutes of conversation about just setting the context of where we are. So I'm sure you'll hear this week that when we began Land and Carbon Lab in 2021, we were already in a state of climate and biodiversity emergencies, and that problem has only got more acute. Although in that time we've also seen ambition, at least has been declared, has gone up massively. We've seen 80% of 2,000 of the largest companies in the world are now setting climate commitments. We've seen the Global Biodiversity Framework come into place, which sets targets to fundamentally change how land is conserved and restored on the planet. We've seen the European Deforestation Regulation about to come into force, which will again change how commodity supply chains work. And you may know all about these things, and you'll probably hear about all these things this week, but what you may not, actually you probably will hear about as well, is this small thing called artificial intelligence. And so we have seen a dramatic rise in the use and availability of artificial intelligence. We are in a moment of technological revolution at the moment with artificial intelligence, and I don't say that lightly. I've been around a while, and I've seen most of them which weren't revolutions, and I think this one probably is. So the Land and Carbon Lab, over the last 3 years, we're an organisation which works with around 200 scientists and technologists across the world, and we've been building everything from systems which will count every single tree on the planet to systems which will monitor the conversion of all ecosystems across the world every 3 days. We're able to map ecosystems which were not easily mapped before, like grasslands, and now we're starting to use advances in large language model technology to be able to share that with everyone, everywhere. One thing that, I don't know if you were in the System Change Lab food session earlier today, and we were listening to the need to actually not just make monitoring available to one group of people, but to the whole system. And so this is what we're looking at doing with some of our monitoring technology, and you'll see that today. I won't dwell on this because I really want to get the other speakers on. But what we're seeing is a need for this generational shift in the way we do monitoring. We have huge ambition, we have a huge emergency on our hands, and I'm going to be an optimist as well today, so I'm going to say we have the technology which allows us to bring information about the world's land into the hands of, well, anyone that needs it. And so we are at that moment, we are in a generational shift. Okay, so you're going to hear enough of me so far. I will come back on stage and ask difficult questions of our speakers, but here are our speakers that will be here today. I will introduce them as they come up if I can remember all their names. But as you can see there, we've got an incredible mix of experience and talents, and looking forward to hearing from them. So first up, we have Kelly Levin from the Bezos Earth Fund, and take it away, Kelly.
Great, thank you. Do I need a time setting? And this is, okay, great. Terrific. Thanks so much for having me. This is such a pleasure, and we're so delighted to be partnering with Land and Carbon Lab and WRI. The Bezos Earth Fund, for those that are not familiar with it, is a $10 billion fund committed to climate and nature solutions this decade. And we are pretty excited about satellites and AI and data. For some of you might have heard, we just released a $100 million grand challenge that is looking at AI applications for climate and nature in 3 different areas. The first is around biodiversity conservation, and this guy is a python in the Everglades, and they're wreaking havoc, especially with mammal populations and stormwater control. And estimates are that there are somewhere between 30,000 and 300,000 of these guys, and traditional methods to stop the spread of them haven't worked. So we're asking questions like, can AI help with invasive species? Can it help identify species? Can it help us protect the most important places for biodiversity? The second area that we're working on with our AI Grand Challenge is with regard to sustainable proteins. Many of you know that the cow is the second most polluting species on Earth after ourselves. And there are 200 million types of proteins out there. And instead of scientists manually sorting through this and combining them, can AI be helpful in terms of novel combinations that make these alternatives nutritious and tasty and affordable? So that's another area that we're looking on. And lastly is reforming the electric grid, where there are 775 million people without electricity today. And we're asking the question of what are novel ways so that we can get renewable energy to people and be able to make sure that we have a thriving, decarbonized world where everyone has electricity access. And the potential in the land use sector specifically is something that we are very interested in. The AFOLU, or agriculture, forest, and other land use sector is about 20% of emissions, harbors great biodiversity, and we are headed in the wrong direction in many, many areas. Our efforts are falling woefully short. And the question here today is, can AI and monitoring and satellite data and bringing a wealth of data together be a game changer here? And we think that Land and Carbon Lab has the potential to really bring forward scalable solutions. There are two aspects of Land and Carbon Lab and the innovations around satellite and AI that I want to touch on. And the first is around monitoring. You can see this data, the partnership between WRI, Land and Carbon Lab, and Meta, where you can see actual individual trees. And the questions that we're interested in, and I think the community will be interested in, is when we have $1 billion commitment for restoration, for example, is it working? When we have a commitment for protected areas in the Amazon or in Congo Basin, are they being protected? Can we actually see the changes that are happening around and be able to help with decision making and tracking progress? And the other is priority setting and understanding where there are areas of great risk that need urgent attention. So if we're going to be investing, for example, in the development of corridors between protected areas or restoration efforts, how can we maximize biodiversity and carbon and understand where those locations should be prioritized? And also with regard to indigenous peoples mapping, can you layer that on and see changes with regard to fires and carbon and biodiversity? The innovations, I think, here are just tremendous, and certainly for a fund that has a $3 billion commitment to nature conservation, we see tremendous applications ourselves, which is why we're so thrilled to be partnering with WRI on this. This image was not generated by AI. It looks pretty weak here. This is the classic picture of a dog who's running faster and faster after a motorcycle, and it can never catch up. It needs something new and different. So it just starts to jump onto the motorcycle. It gets a new mode of transportation. And I think the question here is, can AI be this new mode of transformation? Can it be really have systemic effects? And I think the potential is there, but it's really hard to actually achieve systems change. So that's a challenge for everybody in this room coming together with Land and Carbon Lab. Can this partnership that we're all developing truly be the motorcycle in this picture and really be a game changer in terms of how we protect nature and address the climate crisis? Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Stay there, don't go anywhere. This is the moment where I have to come on stage and ask you a question. So System Change Lab is an important part of your portfolio. Where do you see sort of the gaps in monitoring helping understanding what's happening in terms of system change?
Yeah, thanks. So I co-direct something called the System Change Lab, which we're tracking the major transformations required for climate and nature. And I think two things come to mind. One is open access data. I think many times the data actually may exist, but they sit behind paywalls. And the question is, how can we make sure that everyone can actually benefit from this data? And the second thing is that too often, we are not actually connecting with users and being driven by those use cases and making sure that it actually reaches the ground of those who are going to be making decisions, I think would be incredibly important to keep in mind.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you so much for talking today. I'm going to take
Thank
the clicker back from you, and then we're going to move on to our next speaker. Okay, so we've got Drew Purves from Google DeepMind. Drew is Sustainability and Biodiversity Co-Lead, and him and his colleagues are working on some incredibly impressive AI-related monitoring systems. So, yeah, here you go, Drew.
Thank you very much, Craig. And yeah, a massive thanks for the invite to join this amazing session. And I've said this privately many times, but I can say it publicly too. Like, it's been absolutely fantastic collaborating with WRI. Amazing organisation and just amazing day to day, week to week to collaborate with you as well. So yeah, thanks a lot, Craig, for this. I wanted to go, right or wrong, I thought I wanted to go back to basics a little bit today and try to give a kind of in-principled argument as to why people like myself and Craig and many others think that we are on the cusp of this revolution in our ability to monitor biodiversity at scale. And the analogy that keeps coming to mind is like a set of dominoes representing the different technical challenges. And all of the dominoes need to fall before we get to that amazing place when we can monitor everything. But the exciting thing is most of those dominoes have now fallen. And the last one, which is the need for large amounts of human collected field data, I think is falling as we speak. And so now really is the time, I think, when this transition is happening, which is very exciting. To ground that a little bit, this is a picture from my garden, which I've been managing for a few years now with biodiversity in mind. And you know, I would love to know everything about biodiversity in my garden, the plants, the soil carbon, the soil fungi, the insects, and how all of that's been changing. But of course, I also don't know that, because that kind of ecological monitoring now and historically has been extremely difficult, extremely expensive, and so on. And for me, that's a mild irritation, but for our ability to address the biodiversity crisis at scale, it's a massive bottleneck. But we think that maybe AI can solve that. So, and in general, we could think of the overall approach here, I think we could call it geo-AI, and that's why I wanted to go back to basics a little bit to explain that. And so the first thing to realize there is what we're talking about here is not necessarily massively increasing the monitoring of biodiversity on the ground. I'll come to that, there's a role for that. But what we're talking about is taking enormous amounts of remote sense data and other geodata and using that to predict the biodiversity. So with respect to my garden, we collect all the relevant satellite data from my garden then, and then predict the plants and predict the soil carbon and predict the fungi. Of course, for that to be useful, those predictions have to be very accurate. But we actually think that it's plausible that we can produce usefully accurate predictions kind of for everywhere, all the time, in the way that Craig mentioned. So at one level, this is actually a standard application of AI, and it's worth reminding ourselves what we actually mean by AI. We can get very philosophical about that, but it's really a shorthand for a particular technology nowadays, which is scaled up deep learning, And when we talk about scaling up, we're talking about the model size as the capacity of the model. Now, to train a huge model like that, it takes huge amounts of data. So we also need to scale up the data. And then you need lots of compute to train a model against that much data. So there's three dimensions: model size, data, and compute. The deep learning part refers to this class of machine learning models inspired by the structure of the animal brain, virtual neurons, virtual links between neurons, etc. And the kind of so what of that is that class of model, if it's big enough and if you have enough data, we've seen is able to predict almost anything. So this is the overall picture that's driving the AI revolution at the moment. But applying that to geo-AI has actually been very challenging. Geodata is so big and so complex, and we've actually had to develop specialist models, and we need to compute even bigger than we do for a lot of other problems. But those dominoes have pretty much toppled over the last 2 or 3 years. And as we see with things like Global Forest Watch, the recent outputs from Meta, the forest height work, all sorts of other work that we're working on at Google and many other places, most of these are gone now, but the bottleneck is the data. So let's unpack that. There isn't just one domino for the data, there are two. So what we're talking about here is training a model, as a reminder, takes all the input data, like the satellite data, and then outputs confident predictions, the plants, the insects, and so on. So there's input data and field data. Now, when we need examples of both to train the model, so we need the field data. Now, once again, though, the input data domino is increasingly toppled. We've got amazing satellites bringing in incredible richness and frequency of data, and increasingly those data are being made available by platforms such as Google Earth Engine and others to researchers. So the last domino then is this need to gather the actual field data that you need to train the model against. We still need those field observations. So what do? Do we stop there and go, oh hey, so near and yet so far? Of course we're not going to do that. And the reason is there are two other forms of AI that can actually help to topple that last domino. So the first of these is AI-powered field monitoring. So we no longer have to just rely on human expertise in the field to gather observations of species and biodiversity. We can do things like put microphones and cameras out in the field, and this can vastly increase our ability to sample the species observations. So that's going to help to push over that domino. But there's another one which I think is, many of us think is very exciting, which is this, and it's one of the biggest developments in AI recently, which is called foundational modeling. The core idea here is that a small number of organizations with the compute can take enormous amounts of data and mash all that up into a generally useful model, such that downstream users can then just bring a very small amount of data and fine-tune that for what we want. And that has two implications in this world of geo-AI. One, actually, is that we can apply foundational modeling on the perception problem, on the field monitoring. So it's already started to have a major impact on our ability to pick up birds and plants in the field. But the other one is this emerging technology of geo-foundational models. So these are foundational models that mash all the satellite data together. And it's a bit like a juicer. If you think of the satellites as fruit, then you can put all this fruit into the juicer, and it creates the equivalent of one of those little breakfast shots that just has the essence of all that fruit crunched into it. And what that means, and then for downstream users, you just do everything with this little essence, and that's very easy. So it's these two trends together that I think are pushing that final domino, which is AI is giving us more observations from the field, and geo-foundational models mean that we get a huge amount of extra value from each of those observations. And it's for this reason, I think, that it's plausible to think that we really can monitor nature globally in a way that was unthinkable until recently. So, and the just last thing I wanted to say was there's actually nothing I've said there that's speculative. Every single one of those pieces is absolutely known. The geo-foundational models are appearing as we speak. There's Satless, there's Satclip, there's Clay, there are likely to be others. So this is all kind of real, and really it's just up to us to put the whole system together. Although I can well imagine that the more important limiting factors may, as often the case, may be socioeconomic. Are we going to open up the data? Can we find the business models and all the rest? Thanks. That's my 101, GeoAI 101. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Drew. There will be multiple choice at the end of this session, so I hope you've been taking notes. I did want to ask you a quick question about, so we've been reflecting on when Google and WRI worked together when we were building Global Forest Watch for the first time. And in the period of building Global Forest Watch, 1 billion people were connected to the internet. The US, 30% of the US had smartphones when we started, 60% of the US had smartphones when we finished. It was a real moment, a big, important technological transition moment in the world. And for those building technology at that time, it was really exciting. Do you see this AI movement in a similar vein, and how is it different?
Craig, I like the way you put it earlier. I'm the same, actually. I think that I took some persuading that this is a genuine revolution. I thought, it was worth us putting research effort into this idea just in case it works with AI. And I joined DeepMind in 2015, so a long time ago in terms of that. But I think now, with the combination of foundational modeling, I think, with the massive geo data sets that become available. I mean, we've seen the evidence. I think it's not even a spec, because when we try it, we can see the revolution happening in front of us. I don't think we even have to speculate about it happening tomorrow. I think it literally is happening right now. Of course, there are a couple of other things that might be worth mentioning. One is, in addition to sort of monitoring what's there, often with this approach for geo-AI, if we're able to predict what's there now from space, because the satellite data actually goes back, in many cases, decades, we can then go back and actually estimate the change, which is incredible. So it's not just what's there, but how it's been changing over 20 years. And now this is harder, but I think we'll increasingly be able to also predict the future, make confident predictions about, for instance, under the business as usual, and even conditional future, sort of if-then scenarios to support decision-making. So yeah, I think all of this, I think it's just happening, right? I mean, it's just, the things that we take for granted now, like iNaturalist, I can point at an insect, and that's revolutionary compared to when I was starting too. So this is just, I think it's true. It's the real deal.
No, it is, yeah. And my ability to identify the weeds in my garden is exceptional now.
Yeah,
all right.
exactly.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much, Drew. That was excellent. Okay. We're going to keep going thick and fast. I hope everyone's paying attention. So next up we've got Laura McCorman from Meta, who's the Director of Data for Good.
Thanks so much. Wow, I'm booming. I'm from Philadelphia, so I'll try not to speak doubly loud into the microphone. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks, Craig, for the partnership and for inviting Meta to speak here today. And it's actually been really cool to hear a through line between all of our talks today, because while the focus is AI, I think equally we need to be concerned about the role of open data to fuel AI models, and that's what I'm going to focus on today, because I work on a program called Data for Good, and we focus on sharing data with nonprofits, humanitarians, and governments around the world to solve global issues. And so when I think about how we're all discussing the role of AI in solving some of these global challenges, I'd like to share a little bit of a walk down memory lane that actually comes from an example outside the climate space. So about 10 years ago, Meta started doing a bunch of infrastructure and connectivity investments in the global south. Now, we had a corporate reason for doing this. Generally speaking, where the internet exists, social media tends to follow. But we're also aware of the fact that when you deliver internet to remote populations, this of course unlocks tremendous economic and social value for those people. So we also felt this was the right thing to do. But like any good corporation who wants to put money in places where it actually drives impact, we wanted good data to back these investments. And when we started to solve these problems, we realized there was actually very poor population data in much of the global south. So many of you will know this if you do work in low and middle income countries. The way we take accurate population data for granted here in the United States, it can be really hard to come by. In places like the DRC, you may have only had a census several decades ago, and even where you have potentially exhaustive administrative data sets, they can woefully undercount remote populations. And so Meta used its tremendous artificial intelligence to try to solve this problem at scale. And I'll show you an example of how we did this. So here's a picture of a rural village in Namibia. This happens to be a place where my colleague Alex was a Peace Corps volunteer. We were able to train large-scale artificial intelligence models in the form of computer vision to identify structures in this satellite imagery. So everywhere you see a purple square is where we found a structure. Now, why is this helpful for population mapping? Well, people tend to live in structures and dwellings around the world, not in the middle of cornfields or in the middle of a mountain. And you can combine the outputs of this model, which is very detailed, so we will predict structures at 1.2 kilometer resolution, with population total count predictions from Columbia University's Earth Center for Science Information Network. And that way you can actually get the most detailed population map ever created. Here's a picture of what it looks like for women of reproductive age in Tanzania for rural settings. Now, why is this helpful? Well, as I mentioned, if you're trying to do any sort of programmatic rollout of really any social service in the world, you need to know where people are. And fast forward to now, these data sets have been open source for over 200 countries in the world, and they've been downloaded 10 million times a year. And we've had feedback from groups like the World Health Organization, who were able to find remote villages in the DRC where children who desperately needed polio vaccinations would not have been found without the advent of these maps. And groups like World Vision, who are doing tremendous investments in water and sanitation in places like Rwanda and Zambia, were able to just recently reach 1 million people in Rwanda with clean water using insights from these maps. So what does all of this have to do with AI for climate and nature monitoring? Well, I actually think it has a lot to do with how we might approach solving this problem, because I think the overall collaboration model can and does look very similar. So in the case of the work that we're doing with WRI and trying to tackle the problems that we face in effective monitoring for the carbon offset market, it started with a very similar frame. We had this corporate problem that we needed to solve, but in this particular case, it's because Meta invests heavily in carbon offsets to meet our net zero targets as a business. But we realized very quickly that there's very bad data in that space. It's not transparent. It's very hard to know that the investments you're making are meeting their intended goals. So again, what did we do? Well, similar to the work that we did in population mapping, we used the entire world's worth of satellite imagery to fine-tune a foundational model like Drew mentioned. These are called Dino V2. They're a class of computer vision models used for identifying things like objects in videos and photographs for the visually impaired. We fine-tuned them to be able to not only identify every tree on Earth, but to be able to predict its height. And this is what that global map looks like. So now, our partnership with WRI and the Land Carbon Lab can use this global map as a baseline for large-scale investments on projects like TerraFund, which are investing in nearly 200 organizations throughout Africa with the aggressive goal of planting 29 million trees. They can use this map to figure out whether or not the projects are having their intended impact, to identify participants in the program who potentially aren't meeting their goals and need additional training, and to be able to transparently communicate its results overall. Now, we think that these examples are really exciting because what they have in common is that we started with a shared goal across industry and civil society. They both show the power of open science and open sourcing our results so that other people can benefit. And they also are fueled by the backbone of a really important and impactful partnership across industry and the nonprofit sector. And so we're very proud to partner with WRI and the Land Carbon Lab in this way. And we look forward to the results of this wonderful collaboration. Thanks.
How many people here program, who code? Any people code in this room? I suspect most of you are using open source software tools which Meta has produced if you're a data scientist anyway. So it's incredibly important. It's incredibly important to make this stuff available. Right, I've got a question for you though about what's next? What's next for Meta and Data for Good? What are you up to?
Yeah, we're a busy team, small but mighty, and so we're actually doing a lot of work in a couple of what I think are really important areas. So another thing in addition to AI expertise that Meta has to offer is that we have a lot of friendship data. And what we found is that here in the United States, through work with the academic community, that friendship networks can be really important data sets for understanding things like economic mobility. We published a big paper a couple of years ago with Raj Teddy and his team that found that if you are friends with people outside your socioeconomic status in the United States, that's one of the key drivers that can help not only an individual but a community rise out of poverty. So we're doing a lot of research in collaboration with groups looking at economic mobility in the space that social connections can provide. And then we're also doing a bunch of work in what we think is another major global challenge, which is international migration. This is another place where there are a lot of data challenges to be able to measure migration, particularly in low and middle income countries. And so we hope to publish some pretty exciting non-traditional data in this space in the next 6 months.
Yeah, that's really exciting. And actually what we find is the social dimension of global monitoring is a very difficult thing to monitor. So I'm really pleased to hear what you're doing there. So thank you so much. Right, this one. Yeah, I'll go with that one. Okay, thank you. Okay. Go on, do it. Go on. Okay. Yeah, before we move on, I just want to say, you may have noticed the speakers that that are coming up on stage now kind of share this idea of thinking at scale. You know, whether it's the Earth Fund thinking about how to scale philanthropic spending, or big technology companies who naturally think at scale. Okay, our next speaker is no different. So I'm going to introduce Rekia Fidel, who's managing partner at the Barker Fund. So please come on up.
Hi everyone. Wow, thank you, Greg. Thank you, WRI. I'm so privileged to be here. I mean, our names are on Google, Meta, Bezos, just such a privilege. We only started our company in 2020, and it's just amazing. And I can see the link because we actually work with the downstream users that you need. We are actually on the ground working with them in the Congo and all over Africa. So we started our journey, wanted to support African entrepreneurs. We wanted to contribute to the impact of climate change in Africa. And so previously, before I started this company, I was in investment banking, and then I'm originally from Niger. And when I lived in Niger, and I saw how much the impact of climate was having on the population, and that gave me the idea of starting an impact fund that actually support entrepreneurs on the ground. So that's our story, supporting and investing in African entrepreneurs. The important thing about climate change is that typically people talk about it in Africa in terms of charity, but in fact it's actually an economic opportunity, right? It's a $3 trillion economic opportunity, an investment opportunity. So the private sector can do a lot in contributing to the impact of climate change, to remedy a lot of the issues that we see in climate change on the continent, and that's where we came in. We started as a small fund, really focused on driving change by doing things differently than other funds. So the first thing we do is source and screen. And so we are in Goma, in DRC, We are in Rwanda, we are in Cote d'Ivoire, we are on the ground. Our HQ actually is in Cote d'Ivoire, in Abidjan, and we work with entrepreneurs. We find them, we understand what the climate screening looks like for them, what does climate mean for them, and we have a slide on that. Excuse me, my voice is not working very well today. And then we have a pre-investment readiness, because what we do is, our work is, we want to help invest in these companies. They're for-profit companies, we're coming from the private sector, so it's important for us that these companies be investment ready. And so this allows us to also hone the impact of climate on the work that they're doing, especially the monitoring and verification and reporting side of it. And then after that, we provide capital. As a fund, as an impact investment fund, it's very important for us to link the impact, right, doing well, to capital. That's a big motivation for anyone. This is how we make change. This is how we get companies to do things differently. There's no way that we're going to find 1,000 companies doing restoration in Goma. However, we'll find 500, and once there's a motivation that capital is linked to providing impact, to adopting different technique, then there will be change. And so that's our vision, and that's how we're working. And then the last piece of activity that we do is post-investment. The post-investment activity is really, really important, because that's when the monitoring happens, right? After we provided funding, how do we make sure that the funding, how do we make sure that trees are being planted? How do we make sure that that it's restorative? How do we measure the impacts of our funding? So the post-investment piece of work that we do is also very important. So that's our approach. In terms of what climate looks like for people on the ground in the context of Africa, it's very, very simple. Three sectors that we work on: agriculture and food systems. So typically the model that we've seen is what we call aggregator plus. You'll have a young man and woman, or women who work through smallholder farmers, provide climate smart seed, a restorative technique, and basically the most important thing is access to market. So they valorize the tree, the shade, the moringa that the farmers are planting. They buy the production, and they sell the production, and that's how they make money. But the most important thing is they work with these farmers. They link to these farmers and that they live with on the ground. So we have a couple of examples that I'm going to go into. The next sector that we work in is environmental and natural resources. Typically, these are nurseries and tree planting businesses, and then the energy sector. So what does it look like? Who are these downstream users that you need, and we all need to kind of understand what they're doing? Soma Life is a company in the shea value chain in Ghana, in the north of Ghana, and the company was started in 2020 by a young woman. And the smartest thing she did was they built the in-house software to track every smallholder farmer that they buy the shea from. And this is small, graduate, went to the local college, find a data scientist or a software engineering, and they were able to build the technology. So they have traceability. So once they bring the shea to the market, now they get 30% more premium on their prices, because they can trace where the shea is coming from. And that added value. This is the exciting thing for us as an investor about Soma Life, right? Let's look at the growth of this story. 10x in 1 year, because she's able to provide traceability, because she used data and technology smartly with the rest of her team. And this is a small company in Accra in Ghana, right? So some of these numbers, I'm sure, are shocking, because most people don't think this happened in Africa, but it happens. And we find these companies, and they're doing great. The most important thing for all of us here in this room is that when she first started, she was only working with 500 smallholder farmers. By 2023, she had 65,000 farmers. Exactly, I'm sure you want that data. Exactly, we want you to have that data, right? So that we can use AI to be able to predict the contribution of the impact that she's doing, and also where to go next for shea, or moringa, or avocados, and all the different commodities that these companies are working on on the continent. So these are the type of companies we work with. We're on the ground, we find them. And so what does that mean for us as an impact fund? To be able to capture this monitoring and verification process of the impact. We have impact embedded in our framework as part of our investment thesis. These are some of the numbers that we're looking at in terms of what we aim to do as an impact fund or a small fund. We're first-time fund managers, working very hard. But so far we've been able to have some big names backing up, so we're very excited about that. But these are the type of impact we're looking to make with our small contribution. And this is a pilot project, right, as an impact fund, really focus on restoration, really focus on these type of companies on the ground, working closely with WRI and others for monitoring, being able to scale and do more, not only in the regions that we're in, but across Africa. And I think that's it.
Thank you so much. That's incredibly impressive, right? Incredibly impressive. So today we've heard these kind of big hand-waving, this is what computing and AI can do for the world, and then to actually see it grounded in reality is really important. And I'm kind of curious, you mentioned that people might be surprised that this is happening in Africa. Maybe you could talk a little bit to the technological readiness of groups that you're interacting with on a kind of day-to-day basis.
No, it's very excited. Our investment readiness is divided into getting them ready for finance, right? To be able to understand, to take money from investors, you have to understand equity, debt, etc. And that's how we started. But very, very quickly we realized this technology piece, right? Technology readiness, we've had to embed it into our program because our investees were asking for it. And entrepreneurs that we work with were asking for it. Just being able to be introduced to ChatGPT and others has proved to be really valuable. So AI is very, very interesting. We have a young company started by a young man in Kenya, in the Great Rift Valley of Kenya in Makueni County, and right out of college, right? Really, really excited, and it's a honey company. So he's working and building beehives, and the intelligent thing that he does is that he uses, again, a proprietary technology to be able to tell the water content and sugar content in the hive. So that helps him predict the quality of honey. And therefore he knows he can predict cash flow, he can predict what can sell. And so imagine being able to do this at scale. He's working with about 2,000 for a farmer provider right now. And so as he continues to grow, to be able to predict the quality of honey using AI will be formidable and give him such an edge, right? And that kind of thing can happen in this region. And we're excited because these young men and women know about technology and they're interested and they're open.
Yeah, I mean, that's phenomenal. And especially for me, because I keep bees, so how about we spend the rest of the time just talking about beekeeping? Actually, there is, just what I remember, there is have you seen, of course you will keep bees too, so have you seen the phones where you put it close to the beehive and it listens for the hum? And it can tell kind of the state of the bees in the beehive just from the hum of the hive. Yeah, these modern beekeepers, right? Wow. Okay, so thank you so much for coming up and telling us your story. That's wonderful. Okay. Okay, so I've given Evan, our Global Director at the Data Lab in the World Resources Institute, the task of summing up and giving his own thoughts around AI and monitoring. So please, Evan, come on up.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg, and thanks, everybody. My name is Evan Toski. I lead the Data Lab at WRI. Data Lab is a team of 50 product managers, engineers, and data scientists who are responsible for the technology you see, things like Global Forest Watch, sort of the team behind all of that work. And so in my line of work, I see probably more than the average person, AI tools, AI pitches. And the interesting thing is everyone else here now is getting to live the life that a lot of us technologists live for a long time. You could have chosen to go to one of 3 different talks about AI in this exact time slot. We have a deluge of stuff. And so the question is, what scales? What actually matters out of all this technology? And that is the question as technologists working within a nonprofit, we spend our time thinking about a lot because we don't have all the money in the world. We certainly don't have all the time in the world. And we have exciting and important problems that we can serve today. And so I'm going to share a little bit how we think about scale, hopefully connecting with some of the other thoughts that the other presenters gave. So the first thing is, when we think about scale, it starts with problems. And that's easy to say, pick good problems. We always hear that, pick a good problem, spend your life working on it, et cetera, et cetera. But what it means to have a good problem for AI is you need to be able to clearly measure something in terms of time, dollar, or skill. All right, so time, dollar, or skill. Is it saving somebody time? Is it saving somebody money? Or is it making someone operate at a higher skill level than before? There are other edge cases, but it's a busy week, and so I want to leave you with something real concrete. If an AI solution is not giving you an improvement in terms of time on your skill, it's not worth it. And then we need to think about these improvements as a distribution. It's not a normal distribution. This is a big old long tail distribution, right? There's a couple things out here that really matter, and most things are pretty average. And we see it in our daily life. You know, we all probably use ChatGPT, these sorts of tools, and it saves us 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there. But when we talk about a 10x improvement in return that the microphone was showing, that's big, right? A 10x improvement for an entrepreneur, that's real improvement, right? And so you have to pick things far on the outlier. That's how you find a problem that really matters, where AI can really help. The second thing is, we have to be more aggressive about evaluation. And so evaluation means something very specific to AI scientists. So if you look at anyone who's building an LLM, there's often evals. And evals are part of defining whether the model is working, right? And they're very rigorous. If you talk to any sort of LLM builder, they could talk for hours about evals. Evals. You go to the international development context, we also have evaluation shops, right? We have these people that sit sometimes in an organization, sometimes very far away from the work, sometimes very close, and they tell us something about how it's going, right? Similar concept. But to really make AI add up, we need evaluations that go from the model level, then go to the application, the software where you actually do it, and then ultimately to the real world. And this is where it's really hard to do this, but we have to. And then what we have to get more comfortable with is letting things go that don't work. We all have a huge incentive to keep going, to keep building, to keep that startup going. But what we need to get to the next level is a faster cycle of getting bad ideas out of the system, finding the ones that work, and going around the cycle again and again. I'll note there's of course a huge amount of optimism which I share, but with any technology, there's always plateaus. You may have heard this concept of S-curves, right? Things go really well for a while, and then all of a sudden we plateau. And sometimes we plateau in terms of model performance, uptake, funding for a thing. There's always going to be a plateau. And while I think we're certainly still in the upswing for AI, the only way we break through that plateau is showing value. By actually showing through evaluations of these models, through the applications and through the real world deployment, that they actually work. That's how we break through. That's how we make sure that there's not another AI winner, or that there's not another sort of gap in implementation. The first two were mostly about things technologists and product builders and people can do. The third is something that we all have to do together as a group. And that is, we have to take this conversation, sort of very pro-social, very climate AI conversation, and we have to move it out of this room. There's the mainstream of AI development, and that is turning back on coal plants. That is doing a tremendous amount of blind progress, right? Just driving forward and leaving a lot of people behind and creating a lot of wreckage. We are here because we believe these technologies can be used for good, and we have to focus on that, as I was doing the first two. But we also have to go out and infect that broader innovation narrative with the things we want out of it. We want more efficient models. We want smaller models. We want actual transparency around how much compute we're using. All these things are possible. There's an ample amount of research that shows that we can actually get these out, but we have to go to the mainstream and say, it's not just enough for you to give us scraps, for you to give us exciting use cases and great demos. We want to affect the mainstream of how AI is built and have it be done in a way that actually considers people, nature, and climate. And that third one, it's important for all of us to come together because energy policy is where a lot of this will be shaped and where a lot of this will be won and lost. And so as technologists or people who care about our climate use cases or applications, things on the ground, it is a little easy to say, hey, that's a big policy conversation. That's happening somewhere off over there. But we have to get involved. If policymakers do not understand how these models work, that's the role of technologists to help explain. If they don't understand how it works in a carbon system, that's the role they actually get in there and explain. And that together, we can both deliver and also prevent a future that we don't want in terms of AI taking over things, wrecking things, and creating a lot more harm than good. So thank you all very much for the time, and Craig, welcome back.
Definitely the right person to wrap things up. Okay, I have a quick question. Actually, before we even get to your questions, I'm going to forget. I've been asked 3 times to mention this. You see the barcodes over there. You've got to scan them and say you're here. Apparently, if you do that, someone wins a car or something. I think that's how it works. So if you could just scan that, that'd be
honey
great.
from your farm,
yeah, and
right?
obviously honey. Yeah. Okay. So, question about AI. You are involved in many projects where AI is a part of it. What's exciting you at the moment? What are you seeing that's looking good?
What's exciting me? So I am personally really excited about changing the interface for information. So we had websites for a long time, and that was the way we interacted with information. Then we had mobile devices, so the way we interact with information. And I really think there's a new horizon that is somewhere between a video game and a chat experience that is going to revolutionize how we actually use and do information. And I don't think we've got it yet. I know our teams are working on this, and if anyone wants to be a test user, I'm sure we could figure out a way to test with any of you. But I think there's a really exciting new horizon, and it'll feel different to use the internet in 5 years. It'll feel different to get information, and that to me is really exciting, right? And it really is a huge opportunity. I don't know if that specifically benefits people claiming nature, but we'll do our best to make sure it does. And yeah.
Yeah, Mario for good. Is that what we're talking about?
Something
right, okay.
like that, yeah.
Excuse me. Okay, so we were really keen to make sure everyone got through their talks and, you know, made sure everyone had a chance to, which has actually meant, you lucky lot, we weren't going to do questions because we didn't think we'd have time, but we do have time for questions now. So I'm sorry, presenters, you are about to get some questions. So has anyone got any questions for any of our panelists today? Yeah, why don't you come back up, or come back up, and then we can do our final song. I'm just going to answer. Who's got the mic? Let's see, I think the gentleman in the middle there started off.
Hello, and thank you everybody for sharing information in AI and data. I'm just, this week, I just arrived as representative of the experience of the Andes and the Amazon. A lot of things are happening in that space. Just bring a couple of concerns that we have in the ground. One of them is, as I hear AI, as you gracefully bring us to 101 of what AI looks like. I appreciate it. So my question is related to, we need data, right? We need quality of data, and we need benchmarks to trace geo AI to see what are those species. And from what I understand, if my memory doesn't fail me, between 40 and 50% of the land mass in the global mass is custodied by indigenous people. And a vast majority of the biodiversity that we haven't digitized is within those territories. And also I understand that indigenous people are sovereign nations, which needs to be entered in treaties. So they are now public commons. So I was intrigued to hear in a couple of talks by now, nobody is talking about indigenous data governance, sovereignty, provenance, and permanence. And if we are talking about, as I know right now, as I have coming from the Amazon, I know that there is challenges in the Amazon happening to environmental DNA to look alternative proteins. Data that is being extracted, bring it to labs, and using AI to find new proteins, new chemicals, new additives, but the permanence and governance is not being curated by indigenous scholarship. How can we really create integrity in a system that is not accounted for these treaties and sovereign nations and their indigenous data sovereignty, and how do we are bringing permanence into the life cycle of data? Just because it enters to a digital commons doesn't mean that have lost the permanence to where it belongs. What I'm afraid of that will happen is a dematerialization of how indigenous people or indigenous scholarship sees their data, biological and non-biological. So I would just like to hear what is happening in this space. And I know that is mapping indigenous land territories happening, but other than that, how we are bringing the indigenous data sovereignty into the place of AI and making sure that the permanence throughout the life cycle, it is happening as we are building these models.
Who would like to take that one?
Who? Me, did you say? Yeah. Oh, I mean, I can give a very quick answer. I mean, it's a really good reminder. Thank you. And it's one of the things that has actually influenced me and my colleagues recently has been some of the language that's coming out of both the climate COP and the nature COP. You know, the climate, nature, people language. And you know, maybe for a lot of people it might sound trivial, but it's really quite thought-provoking to think, yeah, we you know, the truth is we haven't thought enough about people in here. And I think there's a very strong, if you read the detail of that, there's a very strong focus there on indigenous and local peoples and communities. So I think it's really good to be reminded of that challenge. I think the way we would think about it, I feel it's the hardest thing for us to think about. I think you probably saw, I did the 101 and the technical things, I think we can line those up. I do think the socioeconomic challenges, the people side of it is the hardest one for us to learn about. So I would say where we are in that journey now is to acknowledge it's a very important problem. I think we really do want this technological transition of AI in general, and including its specific application to sustainability, to be genuinely empowering for indigenous peoples and more generally the global south, etc., in a way that some previous revolutions haven't been. I think the way we would tend to address that would be to work through partners, though, because I feel like we just don't understand the space. The sort of people we are at the moment and the communities we don't understand the space. And I think we'd want to work through the right partners. I mean, it's so inspiring to hear about Barker. I mean, it's incredible, right? So you're completely at the other end of the spectrum there. So hopefully that's not too general an answer, but I just want to very much welcome the perspective here and say we are determined to take it seriously somehow, but it would be working through partners. Yeah.
I think just to add, I mean, there are conversations in the Convention on Biological Diversity to see how this rich information can be valued from a financial standpoint. To just flip it on the head, as we start to appreciate this data even more, and it's more critical for some of the work that we're doing, it could be, if we get this right, a tremendous opportunity. Certainly if we get this right, and you bring up such critical, important points, which I think the field is starting to move on, but not fast enough.
Could I add, I think it's important to note there isn't a holistic solution, but there are a lot of things that our field can learn from others. And I think it's importantly to connect with the folks who do biomedical management, and things like the Kyoto Protocol have gone far forward. And we as a climate and nature community need to adhere to those and focus on those. The other thing is there's a lot of progress in community governance of data that we need to remember and learn from. I think tomorrow our Landmark team will be launching more, and that is entirely based on a community-based model of governance around data. And if we don't bring those tools, each of these being an independent tool, not a singular solution, to the table, it's likely that we'll have worse outcomes than better.
Okay, thank you. It does feel like things are moving extraordinarily fast, though, right? And something's been left behind. Yes.
The gentleman who just asked that question brings up a great point. I want to ask a follow-on question. So, given that you have half of this global biodiversity in these sovereign territories, and there's an argument to be made where I think we're kind of saturated in terms of the input data in the presentation that you from DeepMind representing. And we're kind of converging, in terms of the algorithms and the approaches to being able to produce these great predictions about whether it's tree height or carbon or biodiversity, any kind of nature-based, output. So what's left, as you said, is this training data. But that's going to be the future. Who is able to access and collect the highest quality, best training data? And most of that is going to lie in these sovereign nations that I don't think we're really prepared to engage with properly to collect that kind of data at scale. So my question to all of you is, is anyone pessimistic about the future for satellite and AI-based monitoring of these programs and practices? Or do we think that in 10 years, 15 years, we're still here where the majority of it's done by teams going on the ground and collecting data by hand?
Who wants to take this one?
I mean, I'm certainly not pessimistic. I think I wouldn't be involved in the work that I do if I thought that this wouldn't have a tremendous impact. But I think your point is well taken, and I think that, while Meta has invested, for example, in this huge baseline model of canopy height, it's only going to have impact into the future unless we update it with more recent, not only satellite imagery, but on the ground forest inventory data. So I think it's about keeping our feet on the gas and not just lying back and saying we did this global model, like great, job's done here. I think it's constantly improving. We found this in terms of our focus on population mapping as well. We made huge improvements with the first version of that model, and that we found by integrating with actually additional training data from OpenStreetMap, we were able to improve upon its accuracy. And then we had a second model that improved upon the accuracy. So it's about, I think, continuing to get the feedback from communities on the ground and improve and be humble where we find inaccuracies. Now, I'm not saying I have the solution, but I think that certainly I'm actually much more bullish on the role of things like AI and computer vision for transforming international development projects than I am to speak openly like necessarily large language models. I think that we just have such an opportunity for this sort of more old school AI, but nevertheless deeply powerful tools to monitor reforestation, to map population, there's just endless opportunity with this work. And I think one of the things that's cool about using satellite imagery is that as much as we are sort of at the behest of satellites tracing the Earth's surface and there are clouds and it's tough, it's a comprehensive data set with very little bias. And I think it isn't vulnerable to some of the challenges you see when you're trying to train something like a large language model that might be inherently biased by the presence of good training data in something like English over a local language. So I'm pretty bullish on the space. I think we have a lot of opportunity to build upon the work that's already been done, but obviously we can't claim success just yet.
Maybe I could, is that okay if I had another?
Go for it.
Just another comment on that. I think, I'm also really bullish and optimistic. Right? Something that we share, but that doesn't mean that there aren't possible failure modes. And so we actually have a very large volume now globally of ecological observations, but the main problem is it's very patchy. So it's concentrated geographically in certain obvious countries, like the Europe and the North America, for example, and also taxonomically. So the key is to really get data from those data gaps geographically. And quite right, you had the reminder earlier, that's where most of the biodiversity is. It's where most of the biodiversity change is going to happen, and it's where we have most of the world's peoples that depend on biodiversity. But one thing we have learned, though, more generally from AI, is that the foundational modeling approach I mentioned gives us a lot more value per data point. And that may create a situation where if local communities get immediate benefit from the monitoring, then that creates that flywheel, right? They get benefit, and then the data goes back in, the AI gets even better, and then more and more people use it. Exactly, yeah.
I wanted to add that I don't think that it's always going to be people coming in from outside to collect that data. In fact, there's so many people on the ground that are so excited about what's happening that it's going to create jobs, it's going to create endless opportunities, because the companies that we're working with, they are the one collecting the data, right? They are the one that there are people from WA in Ghana, and we've been there on the ground that are working, that left college and decided to stay home and build a business for themselves. And so this opportunity and increasingly impacting and no language barrier for them, right, to talk to the locals, the men and women on the ground, the smallholder farmer, and provide opportunity, right, with the shea, the introduction of shea as a new value chain. All of a sudden, smallholder farmers have more than one crop or one season. They can do other things. And so I'm excited. I'm excited to be able to replicate this model across all of Africa, as we see it grow, as it gets better, as we're able to collect the data and get it to where it needs to be. But I think there's going to be an opportunity for really great collaboration, right? Like one of the things we tell companies and young men and women when we meet them, we can plant the trees. Planting trees is a great thing now, right? Trees are the best thing that happens, right? And people are excited about these small changes, and it will add up. I think that in the future, as you get more people to kind of understand and then see the benefit, it'll be positive. I'm hoping.
Okay, thank you. I think we've probably got time for one more question. You two are going to have to arm wrestle for it. You call my eye first, so you get to go first. Thanks. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kim Chait from Rainforest Foundation. We're probably one of the biggest users of Global Forest Watch. The data, we have a network of indigenous monitors up and down the Napo River into the Amazonas, and they use the satellite alerts to not just detect where there might be deforestation, but also it empowers them to go to the authorities and say, hey, there's something going on, and we need intervention from law enforcement. So it's actually, we are using the data and the people on the ground who have GPS-enabled cell phones to go and monitor the data. So I think there's always going to hopefully be a need for the ground truthing, on the ground, and the higher level monitoring. So it's more of a commentary to say how happy we are with the Global Forest Watch technology.
That's wonderful to hear. I'm afraid we don't have any more time for questions, but thank you for putting your hand up. It's a very nice hand. Okay, so I just want to finish by saying what an absolute pleasure it's been to share a stage with the five of you. I hope everyone's had a good time. And yeah, exactly. Give them a round of applause. Yeah, so I mean, if you do want to know more about the Land and Carbon Lab, we do have a booth downstairs as well, so we've got staff there. Please go ahead and talk to them, and we'll be about, so yeah, come and find us. All right, thank you very much.
You said, yeah,